Hello everyone, today I want to talk a little bit about my IELTS process. So I'm specifically going to be focusing my experience on the 2024 online digital IELTS exam. First of all, here are my stats. I got an overall score of 8. My listening was at 9, my reading at 8, my speaking at 8, and my lowest writing at 7. I want to talk a little bit about my background so that you know what sort of experience I'm taking this test based off of. So I am an international student. I have been abroad ever since I was young. So I was in a foreign country. The main language the country spoke there was not English, but my school was an international school, so basically my environment in the school and the place I was in almost daily was an English environment. So in other words, English is my mother tongue, even though I do not necessarily come from any English background. This also means that I've never actually officially learned the grammar system or how English grammar works. And thirdly, I'm a high school student and I took this test because I am in the current application process of applying for international schools for my high school application. I took the test on May 7th, 2024, and it was the online version. Initially at the start, I actually did not want to take the online version. I took the paper version a while ago and I wanted to redo that because obviously I have more experience with that. Due to some family complications, I had to delay my registration, and so therefore online test allows you to register for the test up to 3 days before the actual exam, but the paper one only allows you to register 1 to 2 weeks ahead of the exam, and I needed that test score really soon because the applications were due very soon, and so I had to do the online version instead. I want to do a little comparison between the online and the paper version. Depending on where you are, the IELTS online test will be available almost every single week, so unless there are any formal holidays, you'd probably be able to take it anytime you want. And it is also much quicker because the speaking, listening, reading, and writing is all done on the same day. However, the only thing is that it is a new format, so if you like to write on the paper, or if you need to make notes and stuff, that's probably not the best for the online version. On the online version, they do give you 1 sheet of paper, but that sheet of paper is used for both the listening and the reading, so it's very limited space. But with the paper test, there are not as many dates that are available, and also at the end of every single test, you have to transfer your answers from the paper, the question paper, onto the answer sheet, and so you could make, very minor mistakes there if you accidentally wrote the wrong letter, even though you knew the right answer. Okay, now I'm going to talk about how I prepared for the test. As I said, I took the test a while back also. Back then it was just really for fun, and I just took the test on paper. For that test, I had a year to prepare, so to be honest, I would say that I had a year plus the month that I took to prepare for the online test. I began officially preparing for the IELTS online test at around mid-April. For the first 5 to 10 days, I thought I was going to take the paper test, and so when I was doing the reading and listening questions, I was doing all past papers by hand. So I would say that the question bank is the same, but it's just a different style that you have to adjust to, because when I switched to the online version, I realized that I have a different way of going through the questions as I did when I did the paper test. For reading and listening, when I did the paper test, I used past Cambridge books, but the online version, when you sign up, the British Council actually provides you with free resources, and they give you around 25 tests to go through, so that's more than enough. And I think I went through maybe 10 to 15 of them. Don't freak out over IELTS resources, there's so much out there, and I think that you don't need to fret about this. I think what's very important for the reading and listening part, enough practice for all different types of questions. So I would say that going through 1 or 2 is okay, but I think at least up to 5. Another thing is that towards the end, I think you should start timing yourself on the online versions. They actually provide you with a clock on the side. So another thing to watch out for is the grade boundaries. I think it's important to get the grade boundaries right at the start. The reason for this is sometimes because you might get a score of maybe 35 or 36. You think that's very close, it's just 1 point off and it's a similar percentage. But in the IELTS world, that could be a difference between an 8 or an 8.5. Now for speaking, I remember when I did the paper test though, I did speak into my notes app, my microphone, and then I would put it into ChatGPT and I would ask ChatGPT to grade it. It's not that helpful, but I think it's a good practice that you could get into. Okay, finally for writing. Writing, I would say, is the only thing that I really need a teacher for, and I did get a teacher for around 2 classes where we went through task 1 and task 2. I did around 5 to 15 task 1 practices, and I did around 5 practices for task 2. I think that you need to get a good teacher, because to be honest, I felt like that the teacher that I had didn't really make that much of an impact on me. Because first of all, she wasn't a native speaker. I think she knew how to get a band 9 or a band 8, but she didn't know how to convey that to me, I felt like. So it may sound as if I only practiced IELTS for around a month, but to be honest, I had a year of practice. It was more of a occasional thing. I would maybe practice once or twice in the week. It wasn't necessarily as focused and as intensive as I did in that month. Just keep these things in mind as you regard my score. Okay, so now let's get on to the actual exam. As I said, the exam is composed of 4 parts: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. I first did speaking. I think that if you do the paper test, the speaking could be arranged on another day. Speaking has 3 parts. The first part is where they ask about you. The examiner will ask about your background, your family, and maybe just some personal questions. The second part is where you have to talk about a topic, so the examiner will give you some time to prepare, around 2 minutes. And the third part is when you have a discussion, so the examiner will ask questions about the topic that you had. So what I talked about was first where I grew up. So as I said, I come from an international background. I'm sort of a third culture kid, and the examiner asked why I returned back to my home country. The topic that I had for number 2 was about working in a library. It also asked should there be free libraries? Should everyone be a librarian? How easy is a job? Stuff like that. And for number 3, the examiner spoke a lot about education, whether it should be a free resource that governments should provide for the citizens. So I scored an 8 on my IELTS speaking, and I feel like, to be honest, any native speaker can very easily get 7.5 to 8.5. But if you really want to get that 8.5 to 9, I personally felt like I spoke too much. I felt like it was more of an interview than like a speaking test. So you have to remember that this IELTS exam is looking for your vocabulary, your cohesion. It's not asking for necessarily your ideas. Because education is something that I'm really passionate about in real life. Like I do a lot of activism work in this area. And so I think I went on a little bit too much and I wasn't focusing on the vocabulary or my cohesiveness. So I think if you're looking for the higher bands, just make sure to stay on track and don't go off that path, and just make sure that you are hitting all the criteria. The second thing that I did was listening. The online listening comes in 4 parts. It progressively becomes harder. In total 40 questions and divided with like 10 questions for each. The beginning might be very easy, like you just write down exactly what they say. But 3 and 4, you never have to infer anything, or you never have to bring extra knowledge, or they phrase it in a different way that it wasn't necessarily what you heard, but it's rephrased in a way that you just have to mix the words up to have it make sense. So I got a 9 on my IELTS listening, and I would say the number 1 tip is that before they start playing the recording, they give you a little bit of time to go through the questions, and you have to take that time. So they do give you like a single sheet of paper that you can use for both the listening and the reading, and you can write down paraphrased words. This is just so that you never get lost and you know exactly what they're talking about. I would recommend that, especially when you're up to parts 3 and 4, to always point at each question, because then you never get lost. You always know what it's talking about and like where you're at. The third part is reading. In reading, it's also 60 minutes and you're given 40 questions. It's not as perfectly separated as listening is, because sometimes the first section might have like 13 questions or 15 questions. I didn't say that reading necessarily gets progressively harder, because actually for me, I always switch up the reading order and I do like whichever one I feel like I should do first. The level's all the same, and sometimes I feel like the first piece is harder than the last piece. A lot of times reading is about concentration, and like when you're not thinking about anything else, you know exactly what it says, even though it might be a very difficult piece. I got a IELTS score of 8 for reading. And the way that I did this was, at first I would go through the questions, and then I would group the ones that are sort of similar together. And then once I knew the larger groups, I would go through the piece chronologically. So if there's one, like certain types of questions that are talking about, say, things from paragraph 1, then I would look through paragraph 1 and then match those first. Within each question itself, if there's sub-questions within them, they're given in a chronological order. So once you know the beginning of the first questions, you can just follow the paragraph and you would know where it would end. I would separate the reading out that way, and I would do like one question set at a time. Actually, I was very surprised, but I finished all of the reading like in 30 minutes, and so I had like 30 minutes to check through. I don't know whether that made it better or worse, because, you know, I made more mistakes because I had so much time to check through, and I kept on second guessing myself. And finally, let's talk about writing. There are 2 tasks to writing, and you're given 60 minutes, and for the online version, you can do whichever one first as long as you finish both. The time is that you should do 20 minutes on task 1 and 40 minutes on task 2, and you should do task 1 first before task 2. You can mix it up, and I would recommend dividing the time so that you have around 5 to 10 minutes to check at the end. Task 1 is always a diagram, and for these diagrams, it's kind of like analyzing data, and I would say that you should, whether the graph is static or if it's dynamic, so whether the time is moving or whether the time is constant. Task 2 is 2/3 of your writing score, and it's always a question. It could be a debate question, it could be a discussion question. There are different question types. I would say as a general tip is that you're analyzing the points. They're looking for a very cohesive paragraph, and so you should go through analyzing small to large. So for example, how it affects an individual, how it affects the community, and how it affects globally. I got a 7 in IELTS writing. I was predicted an IELTS writing of 6.5 to 7.5, so I think I'm within that range. But I would say very importantly, you should always look at the rubric, because the rubric tells you exactly what they want. This is similar to speaking. You should not be putting too many ideas. They're not looking for your ideas. Instead, they're looking for the way you produce your ideas. So if you write in a really nice way, it may score better than if you had really nice ideas. Obviously, to hit like bands like 8.5 to 9, you obviously have to have a combination of both. And I think that's really difficult, because it's not really that similar to the English language literature writing that I normally do. It talks about task achievement and task response, and this means that they want a really clear logic about answering the question. If the question asks to summarize or to analyze, you should do exactly that. If the question asks to discuss, you should not do any analyzing. Writing for me is a weak point. I think that I'm in a very like native way, so I added in some like fancy words and stuff like that, but I felt like maybe it wasn't academic enough, and maybe I had better ideas than I did in the quality of my writing. I always had a problem of quantity over quality in my writing, and so I think that probably affects my score. Now I want to talk finally about the sign-up process and the actual test day. I took my IELTS at a university test center in China, and I signed up through the Chinese NEEA official link. I think that each country has their own individual IELTS sign-up. I arrived on May 7th, 11 a.m. for my speaking. My speaking was due at 11:40. So they will assign you the day of the other 3 parts, so the listening, reading, and writing. You can choose that date, but for the speaking, you have to actually like sign up for the date, but you might not actually get that time slot, and it might not be free. So actually, if you sign up for that slot, it takes around 4 days before the test to actually confirm, before you can actually like officially like go. Lunch was at around, I would say, 12 to 1. The rest of the test started at 2, but I had to be back at 1. And because the other parts each took an hour, it took around like from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. and I was done around then. Finally, for the scores, for the online version, the scores will be given to you like online on the website in around 3 to 5 days, but the official certificate comes in around 1 to 2 weeks. So that was my whole IELTS process. I keep on enunciating this, but I just want to say that you shouldn't compare yourself to others with regards to your IELTS score. I'm a speaker coming from like a fluent native English background, so the way that I prepare for the test might be very different to you guys. So if this video is not suitable for you, just like hear the different ideas, but just make sure that you're doing the right things to prepare for your test, because I do know that some people who have English as their second language might not be able to prepare for the test as easily as I think I did. And even though I prepared, I would say, a lot easier, I still did not get, I would say, that high. I think 8 is okay, but it's not the best still. If you're aiming for 8.5 or maybe even 9, I think you should do even more rounds of preparation and just have a really sturdy score so you know exactly what's coming up. Just a final tip before you go to the test is that just make sure you don't freak out, because I think if you freak out, you're going to mess up the entire day. That's just with any test in general, but good luck everyone, and I know that you can do this, and you just have to believe in yourself.